Malinche, Disc 2.
That day, Cortés had arisen at dawn, restless. The few snatches of sleep he had managed to obtain had been interrupted by dreadful nightmares. The most terrifying was the one that came from a dream that he had had years before, in which he saw himself surrounded by strangers who indulged him with courtesies and honors, treating him like a king. At the time, that dream had filled him with joy and had given him the certainty that he would one day become someone important. However, the night before, the dream had become a nightmare, the honors this time appearing as ridicule, as whispering intrigues, as knives with eyes that fixed themselves on his back, as death. The worst of it was that upon opening his eyes, the dream continued, the fear still there, crouching in the darkness. He did not like the dark. It shrunk his soul. During his long sea voyages, he would always look for the North Star in the sky, the sailor star, so that he would not feel lost. When it was clouded and he could not see the stars, sailing through a black sea filled him with anxiety. Not knowing the language of the natives was the same as sailing through a black sea. For him, the Mayans were as inscrutable as the dark side of the moon. Their unintelligible voices made him feel insecure, vulnerable, and he had no trust in his translator. He did not know how faithful Friar Jerónimo de Aguilar was to his words, or how capable he was of betrayal. The friar had arrived practically as if dropped from the heavens. The survivor of a shipwreck years before, Aguilar had been imprisoned by the Mayans. In captivity, he had learned their language and the customs of their culture. Cortés had felt very fortunate when he found out about him and promptly had him rescued. From the very beginning, Aguilar gave Cortés crucial information about the Mayans and, above all, about the extensive and powerful Aztec Empire. Aguilar had proved useful as interpreter between Cortés and the natives of the Yucatan, but he had shown little ability to negotiate or persuade, since, clearly, had he possessed those skills, the first battles between the Spaniards and the natives would not have been necessary. Cortés preferred to resort to dialogue rather than arms. He fought only when he failed in the field of diplomacy. He soon had no choice. He had won the first battle. His instinct for victory had led to the defeat of the natives in Cintra. Of course, the presence of horses and artillery had also played a very important role in that, his first triumph on foreign soil. However, far from feeling festive and wanting to celebrate, he was seized by a sense of helplessness. At an early age, he had developed confidence in himself through the ease with which he managed words, interweaving them, applying them, and using them in the most suitable and convincing fashion. Throughout his life as he matured, he confirmed that there was no better weapon than a good speech. Yet now he felt vulnerable and useless, disarmed. How would he be able to use his best and most effective weapon on those natives who spoke other languages? Cortés would have given half his life if he could master the languages of that strange country. In Hispaniola and Cuba, he had advanced and won positions of power thanks to his speeches, which were embellished with Latin phrases and showed off his knowledge. Cortés knew that there would not be enough horses, artillery, and harquebuses to achieve dominion over these lands. These natives were civilized, different from those in Hispaniola and Cuba. Cannons and horses were effective when dealing with savages, but in a civilized context, the ideal thing was to seal alliances, negotiate, win over, and all this could be done only through dialogue, of which he was deprived from the very start. In this recently discovered world, Cortés knew that he had the opportunity of a lifetime in his hands. Yet, he felt shackled. He couldn't negotiate, and he urgently needed some way to master the language of the natives. He knew that by any other means, sign language for example, it would be impossible to accomplish his aims. Without the mastery of the language, his weapons were useless. It would be like using a harquebus as a club instead of firing it. His thoughts came so swiftly that in a matter of seconds he could devise new purposes and new truths that would serve him in maintaining life according to his convenience. But these ideas and goals rested upon the strength of his speeches. He was also convinced that fortune favored the brave, but in this case, courage, which he possessed in abundance, was of little use to him. This was a mission that would be built from the start on the basis of words. Words were its bricks, courage its mortar. Without words, without language, without speeches, there was no mission, and with no mission, no conquest. The night that had ushered in the new day had filled Montezuma's head with nightmares. The emperor had dreamed of children who were walking naked on the snow that covered the volcanoes of Popocatépetl and Iztaccíhuatl. They did it willingly, even though they would be sacrificed so that Huitzilopochtli would be nourished. Montezuma saw how those children were drowned in a spring and how their bodies floated. Then he saw that the god of water was walking over them and that fat drops of water fell from the sky, the same as the Emperor Montezuma held in his eyes when he awoke. Later, not sleeping, he imagined that the skulls of the children would be the cups from which all of them would drink water. This image caused him to feel at once both fear and pleasure. Perhaps the latter was what most horrified him. Suddenly, a violent wind blasted the door open and let the sunlight fall on Montezuma's face. His eyes would breakfast on wind and light that morning. The violent gusts shook the curtains, ripped things from their place, and cast objects onto the floor of the room where Montezuma had slept. Horror overcame the leader, and his mind fabricated at great speed a series of images of exemplary punishments. Agave thorns piercing the tongue or the penis, bloody needles that spoke of guilt, of the great guilt that Montezuma bore on his shoulders because his people, the Aztecs, had betrayed and distorted the principles of the ancient Toltec religion. The Aztecs had been a nomadic people until they established themselves in Tula. The mythic founder of Tula was Quetzalcoatl, the plumed serpent, and Montezuma was sure that the arrival of the Spanish was due to the fact that Quetzalcoatl had returned and was coming to get his due. Fear of the god's punishment paralyzed his enormous skill for war. Otherwise, he would have wiped out the foreigners in a single day.